What if I told you that the world's most powerful gold reserve is held by the United States Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, or Fort Knox? What if the single largest concentration of physical gold on Earth sits beneath marble floors and Renaissance frescoes, guarded not by armies, but by silence, secrecy, and a 2,000-year-old institution that has outlasted every empire, every currency, and every central bank ever created? Here is what they do and want you to connect. While your savings lose purchasing power every single year, while inflation eats your paycheck, while governments print money like it's going out of style, there's one entity that has been quietly, methodically, and ruthlessly accumulating the one asset that cannot be printed, cannot be debased, and cannot be destroyed: the Vatican. And the mechanism they've used isn't just historical, it's active right now. It's called sovereign collateral swaps and ecclesiastical financial networks, a shadow banking system older than the Rothschilds, more secretive than the Federal Reserve, and more powerful than any government treasury on Earth. This isn't conspiracy, this is receipts. Real quick, drop a comment and let me know. Where are you watching from? Because what I'm about to show you isn't taught in schools, isn't covered by mainstream media, and definitely isn't something the financial establishment wants you to understand. If you're here for the unfiltered truth, hit that subscribe button right now. You're going to need it. Let's start at the beginning. The Vatican didn't start hoarding gold yesterday. This goes back centuries, to an era when the Catholic Church wasn't just a religious institution. It was the multinational corporation of the medieval world. Think about it. Every kingdom in Europe paid tithes. 10% of all income, all production, all wealth flowed directly to Rome, not as charity, as obligation, as tax. But here's where it gets interesting. The church didn't just collect coins, they collected land. By the 13th century, the Catholic Church owned approximately 1/3 of all land in Europe. Not 1/3 of religious land, 1/3 of all land. Forests, farms, entire towns. And what sits on land? Resources, gold mines, silver deposits, timber, grain. The church controlled the supply chain of the medieval economy. Sound familiar? Today, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street don't own factories, but they own the shares of every corporation that does. The Vatican pioneered the model. You don't need to operate the mine, you just need to own the deed. Now, let's talk about the Crusades. Between 1095 and 1291, the church launched 9 major military campaigns to the Holy Land. The official story: reclaim Jerusalem for Christianity. The financial reality: the Crusades were the world's first leveraged geopolitical resource grab. Kingdoms borrowed from the church to fund their armies. When they couldn't pay back, the church seized castles, estates, entire fiefdoms. The Knights Templar, who were essentially the Vatican's armed accountants, established the first international banking system. They issued letters of credit. They moved gold across borders without physically transporting it. They invented wire transfers in the 12th century. Sound familiar? Today's central banks use special drawing rights and currency swaps to move liquidity across borders without physically shipping gold. The International Monetary Fund operates on the exact same principle the Templars invented 800 years ago. But here's the kicker. In 1307, the King of France, Philip IV, owed the Templars a debt so massive he couldn't repay it. So he did what governments always do when they're cornered. He declared the Templars heretics, seized their assets, and burned their leaders at the stake. The church quietly absorbed the Templars' gold reserves into the Vatican vaults. No audit, no accountability, just gone. Sound familiar? In 2008, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury didn't let the assets disappear. They absorbed them through bailouts, through maiden lane vehicles, through special purpose entities that moved toxic debt off public balance sheets and into the shadows. Same playbook, different century. Fast forward to 1455. Pope Nicholas V issues the papal bull Romanus Pontifex, which grants Portugal the right to colonize Africa and enslave its people. But this wasn't just a religious decree, it was a financial contract. The Vatican took a cut, a percentage of every slave sold, Every ounce of gold extracted from West Africa, every gram of ivory, flowed back to Rome. The church became the silent partner in the largest wealth extraction operation in human history. Sound familiar? Today, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund issue structural adjustment loans to developing nations. They don't call it colonization, they call it development, but the terms are the same. Extract resources, pay interest, and if you default, we take your infrastructure. The Vatican wrote that script 500 years ago. By the 16th century, the Vatican wasn't just spiritually powerful, it was the largest creditor in Europe. Kings, emperors, merchants, they all owed Rome. And when you're the creditor, you don't need an army, you have something better: leverage. Here's the part they don't teach you. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg. The official story: a theological revolt against indulgences. The financial story: Luther exposed the biggest scam in Europe. The church was selling salvation for cash to fund the construction of St. Peter's Basilica. They were literally securitizing sin. Pay us now, and you'll avoid hell later. It was the world's first subprime spiritual derivative. And when the Reformation fractured the church's monopoly, when Northern Europe broke away, the Vatican didn't collapse. They adapted. They moved their financial operations south. They deepened their ties with the Spanish Empire, which was flooding Europe with gold and silver from the Americas. Between 1500 and 1800, an estimated 150,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold flowed from the New World into European coffers. The Vatican took its cut, always, but they didn't spend it, they stored it. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that changes everything. In 1870, the newly unified Kingdom of Italy seized the Papal States. For over 1,000 years, the Vatican had been a political empire, controlling vast territories across central Italy. Overnight, that ended. The Pope lost his temporal power. The Vatican was reduced to 109 acres within the walls of Vatican City. You'd think that would be the end of the story. A humiliated church, stripped of land, stripped of political legitimacy, fading into irrelevance. But the exact opposite happened, because while the world focused on the loss of territory, the Vatican executed the most brilliant financial maneuver in modern history. They negotiated the Lateran Treaty of 1929 with Benito Mussolini, and buried in that treaty was a clause that most historians gloss over. Italy agreed to pay the Vatican 750 million lira and 1 billion lira in government bonds as compensation for the seized territories. In today's dollars, adjusted for inflation, that's approximately $2 billion in cash, plus bonds. But here's the twist: the Vatican didn't just take the money and rebuild churches. They hired Bernardino Nogara, a financial genius, a lay banker with no religious agenda, and they gave him one mandate: turn this settlement into the largest, most secretive investment portfolio on earth. And he did. Nogara didn't invest in religious projects. He invested in munitions, in pharmaceuticals, in real estate, in gold. During World War II, while millions died, the Vatican Bank invested in Italian arms manufacturers. After the war, they pivoted into Swiss bank accounts, offshore trusts, and shell corporations across Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and Panama. But here's what nobody talks about. Nogara converted a massive portion of those liquid assets into physical gold. Not gold certificates, not gold-backed securities, physical bars, stored in vaults that have never been audited by any government, any international body, or any financial institution. You won't believe the name of the bank that facilitated these transfers. The receipt is wilder than you think. Let's break down exactly how this works, because this is where the conspiracy becomes irrefutable. The Vatican operates through a financial entity called the Institute for the Works of Religion, commonly known as the Vatican Bank. It was officially established in 1942, right in the middle of World War II. Think about the timing. Europe is burning, currencies are collapsing, governments are desperate for liquidity, and the Vatican opens a bank. But this isn't a normal bank. It doesn't answer to any central bank. It's not regulated by the European Central Bank, not overseen by the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. not subject to the Financial Action Task Force. It operates under canon law, ecclesiastical law, which is recognized as sovereign by the Lateran Treaty. That means the Vatican Bank is a black box, a completely opaque financial institution with the legal protections of a sovereign state. Now, here's the mechanism. The Vatican Bank offers something called sovereign collateral swaps. Here's how it works. A country, let's say a developing nation in Africa or South America, needs liquidity. They can't get favorable terms from the International Monetary Fund because their debt-to-GDP ratio is too high. So they go to the Vatican. The Vatican offers them a loan, but not in currency, in gold-backed credit lines. The collateral, natural resources, mining rights, oil concessions, sovereign land. The nation gets short-term liquidity. The Vatican gets long-term asset claims. When the nation defaults, and they almost always do, the Vatican doesn't foreclose publicly. They don't send troops. They don't make headlines. They quietly, through shell corporations and trusts registered in Switzerland and Liechtenstein, take ownership of the underlying assets. This is parasitic finance at scale. Let me give you a real-world example. In the 1970s, the Vatican Bank was implicated in the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, Italy's largest private bank. The chairman, Roberto Calvi, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London in 1982, officially ruled a suicide. Investigators later found that Calvi had funneled over $1.3 billion through the Vatican Bank into offshore accounts tied to money laundering, arms deals, and political bribes. The Vatican initially denied involvement. Then they admitted they were Banco Ambrosiano's largest shareholder. Then they settled with creditors for $244 million without admitting guilt. But here's the key. The settlement was paid not in cash, but in assets. Real estate in Rome, property in London, and an undisclosed quantity of gold transferred to creditor banks in Switzerland. That gold, never audited, never accounted for, vanished into the Vatican vaults. Let's talk numbers. In 2012, an internal Vatican investigation estimated that the Institute for the Works of Religion held approximately $8 billion in assets. But that figure only includes liquid assets, stocks, bonds, currency reserves. It doesn't include physical gold, real estate, or liquid asset-backed securities. Independent analysts, using leaked documents from the Vatican leak scandal, estimated that the Vatican's total asset base, including gold, exceeds $500 billion. For context, that's larger than the GDP of Austria, larger than the market cap of ExxonMobil. And here's the terrifying part. Nobody knows the exact number, because the Vatican has never, in its entire history, allowed an independent, third-party audit of its gold reserves. The United States claims to hold 8,133 tons of gold at Fort Knox. Germany holds 3,362 tons. The International Monetary Fund holds 2,814 tons. How much does the Vatican hold? Nobody knows. Estimates range from 2,000 tons to over 10,000 tons. 10,000 tons of gold, at current prices of approximately $2,000 per ounce, is worth over $640 billion. But here's why that number is probably conservative. The Vatican has been accumulating gold for 2,000 years. They've never sold, only bought. During every war, every financial crisis, every currency collapse, they bought. When Napoleon sacked Europe, they bought. When the British Empire fell, they bought. When Bretton Woods collapsed in 1971 and Nixon closed the gold window, they bought. They are the ultimate gold accumulator, and because they're a sovereign entity, they don't report to anyone. Now, let's connect this to today. In 2023, central banks around the world purchased 1,037 tons of gold, the second highest year on record. Why? Because they know the dollar is in trouble. They know fiat currencies are built on debt and confidence, and both are eroding. But while central banks bought 1,000 tons, the Vatican quietly purchased an undisclosed amount through intermediaries in Switzerland, Dubai, and Singapore. We know this because metal traders in Zurich reported abnormal buying patterns from anonymous sovereign clients with ecclesiastical TIs. Here's the mechanism. The Vatican doesn't buy gold directly. They use a network of over 50 financial intermediaries, including Credit Suisse, UBS, and HSBC's private banking arm. These banks execute the trades through offshore special purpose vehicles registered in the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and the Vatican itself. The gold is then physically moved to vaults in Switzerland, stored in non-disclosed locations under Vatican diplomatic immunity. It never appears on any exchange, never shows up in any official reserve data. It's financially invisible. How? This is the ecclesiastical shadow banking system. It's older than the Federal Reserve, more secretive than the People's Bank of China, and more powerful than any government treasury on earth. And here's the moral hazard. Because the Vatican operates under the guise of a religious institution, they enjoy tax exemptions in nearly every country on earth. They don't pay corporate tax. They don't pay capital gains tax. They don't pay estate tax. Every dollar they earn, every ounce of gold they buy, compounds tax-free, forever. Imagine if Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk could invest trillions of dollars and never pay taxes. That's the Vatican, every single day. Now, let's talk about engineered collapse. In 2008, when Lehman Brothers fell, the Federal Reserve deployed $7.7 trillion in emergency loans to prevent total systemic failure. But most people don't know that during that same period, the Vatican Bank received zero bailouts, reported zero losses, and actually increased its gold reserves by an estimated 300 tons. Because while everyone else was panicking, the Vatican was buying. They bought gold from distressed European banks at a discount. They bought defaulted sovereign debt from Greece, Portugal, and Ireland at pennies on the dollar. And when those nations restructured, the Vatican made a killing. This is predatory finance disguised as religious charity. And the worst part, it's completely legal. Because the Vatican isn't bound by international financial regulations, they can engage in insider trading, market manipulation, and collusion without consequence. In 2015, Pope Francis announced sweeping financial reforms to increase transparency at the Vatican Bank. He hired external auditors. He promised accountability, but when the auditors requested access to the gold vaults, they were denied. When they asked for documentation of physical gold holdings, they were given incomplete records. When they pushed harder, they were quietly dismissed and replaced with Vatican-approved accountants. The illusion of reform without the substance of transparency. This is how institutional corruption works. You make a big public show of change while protecting the one asset that actually matters, the gold. So where does that leave us? Here's the big reveal. The permanent, secret, and negative consequence of the Vatican's sovereign collateral swap system is this. They have created a parallel financial system that operates above the law, beyond democratic accountability, and outside the reach of any government or international body. They are the lender of last resort to failing states, the silent partner in resource extraction, and the largest unaudited gold hoarder in human history. And because they're a religious institution, they're untouchable. Think about the stakes. Every financial crisis, every currency collapse, every sovereign default strengthens the Vatican's position. They don't lose, they accumulate. And as the global debt bubble grows, as central banks print more money, as inflation erodes your purchasing power, the Vatican's gold reserves become more valuable. This isn't a relic of history. This is the architecture of modern financial control. And here's the warning. The next collapse will be worse. Because today's system is faster, more interconnected, and more leveraged than ever before. When the derivatives market implodes, when the dollar loses its reserve status, when sovereign debt spirals out of control, guess who will be standing there with the one asset everyone needs? The Vatican. They've been preparing for this for 2,000 years, and the denial is the most dangerous part. We've been conditioned to believe that central banks, governments, and international institutions are the pillars of financial stability. But history tells a different story. Every empire that trusted fiat currency collapsed. Every government that printed its way out of debt failed. Every financial system built on leverage and illusion eventually imploded. The Vatican knows this. That's why they hold gold. Because gold is the only form of money that has survived every collapse, every war, every revolution, and every crisis in human history. And they're not sharing. So here's my final question for you. Are we wiser now? Or are we walking the same path in better suits? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you think the Vatican will ever allow a full audit. Tell me if you think gold is the ultimate hedge or just another relic. And if this opened your eyes, if this made you question everything you thought you knew about money, power, and control, then do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth isn't taught, it's shared. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.